Louisiana will be working with one less national banking institution after one of the state's most powerful economic leaders referred to the institution as politically biased. State Treasurer Fleming announces Louisiana will not authorize Bank of America as a fiscal agent. According to a release by Fleming, his decision comes in response to a list of evidence revealing the bank's, quote, disgraceful practices in purposefully denying banking-related services to customers of religious organizations, gun manufacturers, and fossil fuel producers. And this isn't the first time Fleming has denounced Bank of America. In April, he joined a coalition with 14 other states, publicly expressing concerns over the potential political bias of the banking institution. In a statement, Treasurer Fleming says, quote, "It is my opinion and that of many Americans that financial institutions should not weigh in on matters involving a political viewpoint, either conservative or liberal, or Republican or Democrat. Such issues should be debated openly among the people and decided by their elected representatives."